The smell of motor oil and leather hit Jack's nostrils as he stood at the gates of the compound he hadn't seen in 25 years, the same gates where they'd stripped his colors and left him bleeding in the dirt. His fingers traced the presidential patch on his new cut, the weight of it heavier than the Harley beneath him had ever been. The guards at the entrance didn't recognize him yet, but they would soon enough. Stay with me on this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Arizona desert as Jack killed the engine of his Road King. Behind him, a convoy of bikes stretched back along the dusty highway, not his old crew, not the savage sons who'd cast him out, but representatives from every major club on the West Coast. They were here because of him, because of what he'd built from nothing, because of who he'd become. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the compound ahead, where the men who destroyed his life were about to learn what 25 years of planning looked like. Jack had been 18 when they'd taken him in. Just a kid from Tucson with grease under his fingernails and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Grand Canyon. His old man had split when he was 12, leaving nothing behind but empty beer bottles and a '74 shovel head that barely ran. Jack had spent every hour he wasn't in school rebuilding that bike, learning its secrets, making it his own. By the time he could legally ride it, he could tear down and rebuild a Harley engine blindfolded. The Savage Sons had noticed him at a gas station outside Phoenix. He'd been 17, working the night shift to pay for parts, when 6 bikes had rolled in like thunder. Their president then, a mountain of a man called Diesel, had watched Jack diagnose and fix a problem with one of their bikes in under 10 minutes. "You got talent, kid," Diesel had said, smoke from his Marlboro curling between them. "We could use someone like you." That was how it started. Jack became a prospect on his 18th birthday, trading his high school diploma for a bottom rocker that said prospect in bold letters. The life consumed him instantly, the brotherhood, the loyalty, the sense of belonging he'd never had. He threw himself into it with everything he had, wrenching on bikes, running errands, standing guard at church meetings he wasn't allowed to attend. The older members said he was one of the best prospects they'd ever seen. Dedicated, loyal, smart, maybe too smart. The compound looked different now, Jack noticed as he approached. New buildings had sprouted up around the original clubhouse, and the fence was higher, topped with razor wire that glinted in the morning light. Security cameras tracked his movement. They were scared now, these men who'd once seemed invincible. They should be. Behind him, the other bikes kept their distance. This was his play, his moment. Tommy from the Diablos had wanted to come in guns blazing, but Jack had shut that down. "This ain't about violence," he'd said at the meeting in Vegas where they'd elected him. "It's about justice. It's about showing them what they threw away." Jack's mind drifted back to those early days as a prospect. He'd loved every minute of it, even the shit work. Cleaning the clubhouse at 3 in the morning after a party. Standing in the rain for hours during a run. Taking punches from drunk members who wanted to test the new kid's mettle. He took it all and asked for more, because he believed in what they'd told him about brotherhood, about family, about having each other's backs no matter what. The patching-in ceremony had been the proudest moment of his young life. They'd burned his prospect patch and handed him full colors on a September night when the desert air still held summer's heat. Diesel himself had hugged him, called him brother for the first time. Jack had thought he'd found his place in the world. He'd thought wrong. It started with small things. Comments about how he was too ambitious when he suggested improvements to their bike shop operation. Looks when he asked questions during church. The older members, guys who'd been riding since the 60s, didn't like a 20-year-old telling them there might be better ways to do things. But Jack couldn't help himself. He saw inefficiency and wanted to fix it. He saw opportunities they were missing and wanted to pursue them. The real problems began when he befriended Marcus. Marcus ran a small custom shop on the south side, building bikes that were works of art. He was also black, which shouldn't have mattered but did to certain members of the Savage Sons. Jack didn't give a damn about their prejudices. Marcus was a genius with metal, and Jack wanted to learn from him. They started collaborating on builds, creating machines that drew attention from collectors across the state. "You're spending too much time with that." Bulldog, the sergeant-at-arms, had used a word that made Jack's fists clench even now, 25 years later. "It don't look good, a patched member hanging around there." Jack had told Bulldog exactly where he could shove his opinions. That was his first mistake. His second was doing it in front of other members. The tension built over months. Jack found himself frozen out of conversations, excluded from rides, given the worst assignments. But he was stubborn, a trait that would serve him well later, and refused to back down. He kept working with Marcus, kept pushing for changes in how they ran their operations, kept refusing to fall in line with the old guard's narrow thinking. Then came the night that changed everything. Jack parked his bike at the gate now, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The guards were young, probably weren't even born when he'd worn these same colors. They looked nervous, hands hovering near weapons they hoped they wouldn't need to use. One of them spoke into a radio, and Jack caught the words, "He's here. The new president is here." 25 years ago, on a night when the desert wind howled like a wounded animal, Jack had discovered something that shattered his world. He'd been closing up the shop. They'd finally let him run it during the days, though grudgingly, when he'd noticed discrepancies in the books. Money missing. Parts ordered but never received. Shipments logged but never delivered. At first, he'd thought it was just bad bookkeeping. The previous guy running the shop had been a drunk who could barely write his own name. But as Jack dug deeper, staying late into the night with only a desk lamp and bitter coffee for company, a pattern emerged. Someone was skimming. Someone was using the shop to launder money. Someone high up in the club. He should have gone to Diesel first. Should have followed protocol. But Diesel had been acting strange lately, distant and paranoid. So Jack had gone to Rex, the vice president, a man he'd thought he could trust. Rex had listened to his findings with a stone face, then told him to leave the books and go home. "I'll look into it," he'd said. Jack had known something was wrong the moment he'd walked into the clubhouse the next night. The usual noise and laughter died as he entered. Every face turned to him, and none were friendly. Diesel sat at the head of the table, flanked by Rex and Bulldog, their expressions dark as storm clouds. "Jack," Diesel had said, and that single word carried the weight of a death sentence. "We need to talk." They'd accused him of stealing. Said he'd been cooking the books to cover his own theft. The evidence he'd gathered had mysteriously disappeared, and in its place were new documents that painted him as a thief and a rat. Jack had protested, had tried to explain, but his words fell on deaf ears. The decision had already been made. "You took an oath," Diesel had said, standing now, his massive frame blocking out the light. "You swore loyalty to this club, and you betrayed us. You know what happens to thieves and rats." Jack had looked around the room, searching for one friendly face, one brother who would stand up for him. He found none. Even the guys he'd considered friends avoided his eyes. The brotherhood he'd believed in was a lie, shattered by greed and corruption he'd been too naive to see coming. They'd held him down, while Bulldog cut his patches with a knife that had seen too much use for such purposes. Each slice felt like it was cutting into his skin, not just the leather. When they were done, they dragged him outside, and that's when the real beating began. Jack touched his ribs absently, remembering the crack of them breaking, the taste of blood in his mouth. They'd left him in the dirt outside the gates, barely conscious, with a promise ringing in his ears. "You come back here, you die. You mention the club to anyone, you die. You exist in our world, you die." He dragged himself to the hospital somehow, told them he'd been jumped by random thugs. No one believed him, but no one pushed either. That was how it worked in their world. He'd healed slowly, sleeping in his car because his apartment had been tied to the club. Everything had been tied to the club. But Jack had something they didn't count on. He had Marcus. The older man had found him 2 weeks later, broken and bitter, trying to drink himself to death in a dive bar on the wrong side of Phoenix. Marcus had listened to his story without judgment, then offered him something unexpected, a job and a chance to start over. "They threw you away because you saw through their bullshit," Marcus had said, nursing a beer while Jack slurred through his tale. That tells me you're smarter than them. Question is, what are you gonna do with that brain now? What Jack did was learn. He threw himself into Marcus's shop with the same intensity he'd once reserved for the club. But this time, he wasn't just wrenching on bikes. He was learning business, real business. Marcus taught him about supply chains, profit margins, customer relations marketing. They built custom bikes that sold for 5 times what the Savage Sons charged for their cookie-cutter choppers. Within 3 years, they'd opened a second shop. Within 5, they had locations in 3 states. Jack discovered he had a talent for business that went beyond turning wrenches. He could see opportunities others missed, forge partnerships others wouldn't consider, build loyalty through respect rather than fear. The motorcycle world is smaller than outsiders think. Word spread about the kid who'd been cast out by the Savage Sons and built an empire without a club patch on his back. Other independents started coming to him for advice, for partnerships, for protection from clubs that wanted to muscle in on their operations. Jack provided all three, creating a network of legitimate businesses that slowly grew to rival the underground economy the traditional clubs depended on. He never forgot the lesson the Savage Sons had taught him. Loyalty based on fear and tradition was worthless. Real loyalty came from mutual respect and shared success. He built his organization on those principles, bringing in people the traditional clubs rejected, minorities, women, college kids with business degrees and motorcycle dreams. His network grew strong because it was diverse, innovative because it welcomed new ideas, successful because it operated in the light instead of the shadows. The guards at the gate were talking rapidly into their radios now. Jack could see movement in the compound, figures emerging from buildings, bikes firing up. They knew who he was now. They knew what was coming. 10 years after being cast out, Jack had been approached by members of the Diablos, a club that controlled territory from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Their president had heard about Jack's operations, about how he'd built a network that generated more clean money than most clubs made from all their illegal activities combined. They wanted him to join, to bring his network under their banner. Jack had refused politely. When they'd pushed, he'd refused less politely. When they'd tried to muscle in on his shops, he'd responded with lawyers instead of violence, with cease and desist orders instead of bullets. It had confused the hell out of them and earned their respect in a way violence never could have. That respect had spread. Other clubs started approaching him not as an enemy or a target, but as a potential ally. They were tired of the old ways, tired of RICO predicates and federal investigations, tired of burying brothers over drug territory. Jack offered them a different path, legitimate business ventures that could launder their existing money while generating new, clean revenue streams. He'd been careful, patient, building relationships over years. He never wore another patch, never officially joined another club. He remained independent, a businessman who happened to love motorcycles, who happened to understand the culture, who happened to have solutions for clubs trying to survive in a changing world. The Savage Sons had watched his rise with growing alarm. They tried to sabotage his operations, sending guys to cause trouble at his shops, spreading rumors about him being a rat. But Jack had something they didn't: credibility. His success spoke louder than their whispers. His money was cleaner than their accusations. Diesel had died 5 years ago, massive heart attack while screaming at someone on the phone. Rex had taken over, paranoid and increasingly desperate as their traditional revenue streams dried up. The drug trade wasn't what it used to be. The protection rackets were harder to maintain, with everyone having cameras. The gun running had attracted too much federal heat. Meanwhile, Jack's network had continued to grow. He'd partnered with clubs across the country, helping them establish legitimate businesses, teaching them how to operate in the light. He'd become a bridge between the outlaw world and the straight world, respected in both because he understood both. The national meeting in Vegas last month had been unprecedented. Representatives from every major club west of the Mississippi had gathered: Diablos, Mongols, Vagos, even some Hells Angels charters. The topic, survival in a changing world. The solution, they decided, was to create a new position, a president who would oversee all their legitimate operations, coordinate between clubs, be the face of their evolution from outlaws to businessmen. The vote had been unanimous. Jack had built what they all needed. Jack understood both worlds. Jack had proven that respect and success could be achieved without violence. Jack would be their first multi-club president, a position that had never existed before, but that they all recognized was necessary for their survival. Which brought him here, to the gates of the compound where his journey had begun and nearly ended. The Savage Sons had fought the decision, of course. Rex had screamed about tradition, about independence, about how they didn't need some college boy telling them how to run their club. But their protests had fallen on deaf ears. They were broke, isolated, clinging to old ways that no longer worked. They could accept the new structure or be left behind entirely. Jack dismounted his bike, removing his helmet slowly. The new cut he wore was unique, patches from multiple clubs arranged in a pattern that had taken months to negotiate. At the center, a new patch, President in bold letters above a design that incorporated elements from every major club. It was evolution made manifest, tradition adapting to survive. The gates opened, and Rex emerged, flanked by what was left of the Savage Sons' leadership. Bulldog was there, gray now and moving stiffly from old injuries. Tommy the Hammer, Snake, Joker, all the guys who'd stood by while they'd beaten him and cast him out. They looked older, harder, diminished. The years had not been kind to those who refused to change. Jack, Rex said, the name coming out like he was spitting glass. Rex, Jack kept his voice neutral, professional. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about business. We need to discuss the transition. Behind Rex, Jack could see younger members watching with interest. They'd heard the stories, knew the history, understood what this moment represented. The old guard's time was ending. The new era had arrived, and it wore Jack's face. "You've got some balls coming back here," Bulldog growled, hand moving toward his waist. Jack didn't flinch. "I've got a mandate from every major club from here to Los Angeles. I've got partnership agreements worth more than this compound and everything in it. I've got lawyers, accountants, and legitimate businessmen ready to help you transition to legal revenue streams." He paused, letting his words sink in. "What I don't have is time for old grudges." The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the desert landscape. Behind Jack, engines rumbled as representatives from other clubs arrived, a show of support that made Rex's jaw clench. This wasn't a raid or a takeover. It was evolution, whether the Savage Sons accepted it or not. "You want to come inside?" Rex asked finally, the words pulled from him like teeth. "That's why I'm here," Jack replied. They walked through the compound, Jack's boots crunching on gravel that felt both foreign and familiar. The clubhouse looked the same, weathered wood and faded paint, motorcycle parts and empty beer bottles scattered around like prayers to a dying religion. But Jack saw it differently now. He saw potential. He saw what it could become. Inside, the main room still smelled of stale smoke and spilled beer. The same massive table dominated the space, scarred wood that had seen too many slammed fists and spilled blood. Rex took his place at the head, a position that would soon be restructured under the new system. The other members filed in, suspicious eyes tracking Jack's every movement. Jack remained standing. He'd sat at this table once, believed in what it represented. Now he saw it for what it was, a relic of a time when might made right and tradition trumped logic. But relics could be preserved, honored even, while still acknowledging their time had passed. 25 years ago, you cast me out for discovering corruption in your ranks," Jack began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "You called me a thief and a rat because I found evidence that someone was stealing from the club." "Ancient history," Rex muttered, but his eyes wouldn't meet Jack's. "No," Jack said firmly. "It's the foundation of why we're here today. You threw away someone who was trying to help because he threatened the status quo. You chose corruption over truth, tradition over evolution. And look where it's gotten you." He pulled out a folder thick with documents. financial statements, legal agreements, business proposals. The future, written in black and white instead of blood and bullets. Your legitimate operations generate less than $100,000 a year. Your illegal operations are under constant surveillance. You've got members in prison, others dead, and the young guys are leaving because they see no future here. Jack spread the papers on the table. I'm offering you a different path. The proposals were comprehensive. Converting their small bike shop into a certified Harley dealership. Transforming their compound into an event space for rallies and concerts. Legitimate security contracts for businesses that currently paid protection money. Every illegal revenue stream replaced with a legal one that could generate as much or more money. This is bullshit, Bulldog spat. We're outlaws not. You're broke outlaws, Jack interrupted. You're dinosaurs watching the meteor coming and arguing about whether you should evolve or not. The decision's already been made. Every other club has voted. You can be part of the future or you can be left behind. He pulled out another document, this one bearing the signatures of every major club president from California to Texas. The new charter, establishing his position and the restructuring of how the clubs would operate going forward. Legitimate business overseen by him, traditional club activities maintained but modified to reduce legal exposure, a gradual transition from outlaw to legitimate that would preserve the culture while ensuring survival. You sold out, Rex said, but the accusation lacked conviction. He was reading the numbers, seeing what the other clubs were already generating through Jack's programs. Millions in clean money. Legal protection. A future for their children that didn't involve prison or graveyards. I evolved, Jack corrected. Just like you're going to evolve, whether you like it or not. The question is whether you'll do it willingly and prosper, or fight it and get left behind. The room fell silent except for the rustling of papers as members read through the proposals. Jack could see the younger guys nodding, understanding the opportunity being presented. The old guard looked torn between pride and practicality, tradition and survival. What about respect? Snake asked finally. What about our reputation? Respect comes from strength, Jack replied. And there's no strength in clinging to ways that don't work anymore. As for reputation, would you rather be known as the club that was too proud to change and died out, or the club that was smart enough to adapt and thrive? He moved to the window, looking out at the compound where he'd once bled in the dirt. 25 years ago, you taught me a valuable lesson. You taught me that blind loyalty to tradition will destroy you faster than any enemy. You taught me that the brotherhood I believed in was conditional, limited by prejudice and fear of change. You taught me that I had to build something better. Jack turned back to face them. I built it. And now I'm offering you a chance to be part of it. Not because I forgive what you did, I don't. Not because I've forgotten, I haven't. But because the motorcycle culture we all love deserves to survive, and it can't survive if we keep eating our own. Rex stood slowly, age showing in the effort. He looked around the table at his brothers, saw the writing on the wall in their faces. The vote, when it came, would not go his way. The younger members wanted what Jack offered. Even some of the older ones were tired of running, tired of looking over their shoulders, tired of burying brothers. If we agree to this, Rex said carefully, what happens to the past? The past stays in the past, Jack answered. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for progress. You work with me, implement these programs, make the transition, and the Savage Sons become part of something bigger instead of a footnote in outlaw history. And if we don't, Jack shrugged. Then you don't. The other clubs will prosper while you cling to your traditions. Your members will patch over to clubs that offer them a future. In 5 years, maybe less, the Savage Sons will be nothing but a memory and some faded patches in someone's collection. The harsh truth of it hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Rex looked at Bulldog, at Snake, at the others who'd ruled through fear for so long. Their time was over, and everyone in the room knew it. Call for a vote, one of the younger members said. Tommy Jr., whose father had died in prison 2 years ago. Let's decide our future democratically, like the bylaws say. Rex's face darkened, but he couldn't refuse. Not with Jack standing there representing every other major club, not with the evidence of success spread across the table, not with his own members calling for democracy. The vote wasn't close. Only 3 members voted against the proposal: Rex, Bulldog, and Snake. Everyone else, even some Jack had expected to resist, voted for evolution. For survival. For a future that didn't end in handcuffs or a grave. "Motion carries," Rex said, the words like ashes in his mouth. He looked at Jack with a mixture of hatred and resignation. "Looks like you got what you wanted after all." "No," Jack said quietly. "What I wanted was to belong here, to be your brother, to help this club prosper. You took that from me. What I got instead was the chance to build something better, something that will outlast all of us. And now you get to be part of it despite everything." He gathered his papers, preparing to leave. There would be more meetings, more negotiations, more work to be done. But the hardest part was over. The Savage Sons would evolve or die, and they'd chosen evolution. "Jack," Rex called as he reached the door. "That night 25 years ago. It was me skimming the money. Me and Diesel. We couldn't let you expose us, so we flipped it on you." The confession hung between them, an admission that changed nothing and everything. Jack had suspected, of course. The setup had been too perfect, the frame too complete. But hearing it confirmed still sent a ripple of old pain through his chest. "I know," Jack said simply. "I've known for years. Your former bookkeeper got drunk in a bar in Flagstaff, told the whole story to anyone who'd listen. Word got back to me, and you never what? Never sought revenge. Never tried to destroy you." Jack shook his head. "I had better things to do. I had an empire to build, lives to change, a future to create. Revenge would have just dragged me down to your level." He opened the door, sunlight streaming in like possibility itself. "But success is the best revenge there is. And brother, I've been more successful than you can possibly imagine." Outside, the convoy of bikes waited, engines idling like patient predators. Presidents and officers from clubs that had once been mortal enemies, now united under a common purpose and Jack's leadership. They'd come to witness this moment, to ensure the transition happened smoothly, to show the Savage Sons that the old ways of isolation and conflict were over. Jack donned his helmet, the weight of it familiar and comforting. He'd ridden alone out of these gates 25 years ago, broken and bleeding. Now he rode with the backing of an entire community, proof that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are just preparation for something greater. As he started his bike, Jack caught a glimpse of movement in the clubhouse window. Younger members watching him leave, hope in their eyes where once there had been only suspicion. They would be the ones to truly implement the changes, to drag the Savage Sons into the modern era. The old guard would resist, complain, reminisce about the good old days that had never been as good as they remembered. But progress was inevitable now. The ride back to Phoenix took 3 hours, the desert landscape rolling by in a blur of sand and sagebrush. Jack rode at the head of the column, the new president leading his coalition of former enemies toward a future none of them could have imagined when the motorcycle culture first took root in post-war America. His phone, secured in a handlebar mount, showed 17 missed calls. Lawyers with contracts to review. Accountants with numbers to verify. Club presidents with questions about implementation. The real work was just beginning. Transforming a culture built on rebellion into one that could thrive within the system while maintaining its essential spirit. That would take years of careful navigation. But Jack had learned patience in the desert of his exile. He'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies, but making them irrelevant. He'd learned that true brotherhood wasn't about colors on your back, but about shared vision and mutual respect. The Phoenix skyline appeared on the horizon, glass and steel monuments to progress rising from the desert floor. Somewhere in that city, Marcus was probably in his shop, building another masterpiece with hands that had never discriminated based on the color of skin or the presence of a patch. Jack owed him everything, not just for the job and the education, but for showing him that there was strength in diversity, power in inclusion, success in thinking beyond the narrow confines of tradition. Jack's phone rang as he entered the city limits. Tommy from the Diablos, eager to hear how the meeting had gone. Word would spread quickly through the motorcycle world. The Savage Sons had accepted the new structure. The last holdout had fallen. The evolution was complete. "It's done," Jack said into his Bluetooth headset. They voted to join. Any trouble, less than expected. They're broke and tired. Even the old guard knows they can't keep going the way they have been. And Rex is a dinosaur watching the meteor hit. He'll either adapt or get replaced by someone who will. Tommy laughed, the sound crackling through the speakers. 25 years, brother. You've been planning this for 25 years. No, Jack corrected, guiding his bike through familiar streets toward the compound that served as his headquarters, a modern facility that looked more like a tech campus than a traditional clubhouse. I've been building for 25 years. This was never about them. It was about creating something better, and he had. The coalition he'd assembled generated over $50 million in legitimate revenue annually. They employed hundreds of people, sponsored charity rides that raised millions more, operated businesses that served their communities instead of preying on them. They'd taken the best parts of motorcycle culture, the brotherhood, the freedom, the rebellious spirit, and channeled them into something constructive instead of destructive. The Savage Sons were just the last piece of a puzzle Jack had been assembling for decades.